bringing to life the souls of the past that until now have been lost to history. Talking Hart Island is a half-hour weekly podcast that explores the history of Hart Island, America's largest mass graveyard. Hart Island has been used as New York City's Potter's Field since 1869. It is estimated there are over 1 million people buried there. Because of recent advances in DNA and fingerprint technology, the identities of some of these previously forgotten and anonymous people have been revealed. The results are truly shocking. Talking Hart Island will interview a special guest each week, selected from an extraordinary assembly of scholars, authors, and scientists in the fields of history, law, medicine, and the arts, as we unravel a secret kept hidden for 150 years. So welcome to Talking Hart Island. And now, here's our host, investigative history writer Michael T. Keene.
Thank you very much, Norma Jean. And this is Michael Keene, and we are Talking Hart Island. One quick thing before we begin. We've been asked, how can you listen to previous episodes of the Talking Hart Island podcast? And you may do so by simply logging on to our website, michaeltkeene.com. Hart Island is haunted by the spirits of the dead. It's used as Potter's Field for indigenous peoples. Each grave is dug by the convicts on the nearby Rikers Island. Underneath its sandy shores lie bones and death. It also holds a secret. Centuries ago, Captain Kidd himself hid his treasure on Hart Island. When a group of Rikers convicts stumble on the first clue to its location, they find themselves in a dangerous race for the gold. The prison guards aren't exempt from the lure of the fortune. As these two groups start competing for the gold, even more death, danger, and mayhem will come to this cursed island. Mike Monahan, the author of the book The Treasure of Hart Island, a novel which we will discuss today, was born and raised in the Bronx, where he still resides. Mike continued the family legacy set down by his father and grandfather when he became a New York City police officer. Before retiring, Mike earned the prestigious Gold Detective Shield. In addition to his career, Mike's main passion is scuba diving. He has explored shipwrecks from all over the world. And I am very pleased to have Mike Monahan on our show. Mike, how are you doing?
Very good, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. We had talked briefly a few days ago, and that you're rather unique on our program because you were born in the Bronx, raised in the Bronx, and you're in the Bronx. I wonder if you could give us a flavor of what it's like to have as your home base the Bronx. Give us a sense of what it's like.
Well, I grew up in the Bronx in a very large project. It was the largest project in the world at the time. I was born in 1951, so I was born in a nice time in the Bronx. Crime rate was low. The projects I grew up in was very large with lots of kids. Back then, families had 4 to 5 children. I went to the local Catholic school, and I knew so many kids. And to this very day, many of my close friends are the kids I've gone to grammar school with. In fact, I was mentioned to you earlier, I'll be meeting some for a birthday party later today. Growing in the Bronx was a great deal. As things change, we all evolved with the Bronx. And part of growing up in the Bronx was a place to go to vacation, to go nearby that was different. And City Island was one of our favorite locations to go to. It was a seaside resort, and it was a nice place for us to go to. And the Bronx is a very, very lovely place then. It still is, only the nice place has gotten a little smaller. than they used to be.
Right. Now, growing up there, did you ever become aware of Hart Island?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there's a kayak club on City Island, and I've been kayaking for over 50 years. And I would kayak around Hart Island all the time. I would kayak around it for exercise. I would fish around it. I would explore on it once in a while. We're not supposed to actually land on the island, but, the kids were kind of, were rascals, and we would do it on occasion. And eventually I started looking at the history of Hart Island. It is quite fascinating. It's a fascinating history. It goes all the way back to the Civil War days when it was first actually being utilized for public use. And I started getting my mind wild ideas about, Captain Kidd in the days of coming in and possibly hiding. He hid his treasure someplace out on the islands coming into New York to answer for piracy charges. And I just got wild ideas about suppose his treasure there. And suppose the Rikers Island convicts were digging mass graves to bury the indigenous people and stumble upon a treasure. These things want to go you through your mind while you're kayaking. So Hart Island's been on my mind for many, many, many years.
Is there actually a belief that Captain Kidd, even though this is a part of your novel, actually did have some connection with Hart Island, or at least with that part of New York?
Well, in Long Island, which isn't far away from Hart Island, it's all in the same area, it is known that Captain Kidd did hide part of his treasure in the South Fork of Long Island on a property owned by the Gardner family. This gold was recovered, but this is only part of the small fortune he had. He was afraid to answer piracy charges in New York. He was afraid that if he was convicted of these charges, everything would be taken from him. So it's known that he hid his treasure somewhere. No one knows where, but it could be out in these islands. So there's a little fact with my fiction from my book all intertwined together.
Right, and the fact that there are Riker Island convicts burying people on Hart Island, and obviously there's the corrections department, the guards overseeing them. All of that is absolutely true. It goes on to, it happens even today. So the whole premise of the book is interesting because it's all feasible. I mean, that's my take.
Right, that's the whole thing. It is feasible, and people from the Bronx love my book because they know it. They've all seen Hart Island, and they know the history of Hart Island because it does have a very unique history, even to the point of during the Cold War, we had Ajax missile silos on the island, which were supposed to protect us from, back in the Cold War days, if the Russians were to send the long-range bombers to the East Coast, these would take them down. Once the ICBM missiles were invented, these silos became useless. But on Sunday mornings at noon, there used to be air raid sirens on Hart Island and the local area, and the silos would actually raise up the missiles just to test them, make sure they could work. And this was a scary thing for kids back in those days.
Absolutely. So, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. Well, I had one final question for you about the Bronx. Does everybody who lives on the Bronx, do they all root for the Yankees? Probably have to.
No, not actually. No, when the Mets came in, it's kind of like an age-related thing. My father was a diehard Yankee fan. I am. Generations behind me became Met fans. Mets were new. They were like the new kid in the block and see how they could do. And unfortunately, they didn't have the money the Yankees had, so the Mets didn't have great players. But they were exciting, and it was new. So we actually have when you get big cities like New York, you have multiple teams. And between baseball teams and football teams, there's a pretty equal thing going on here between who likes the Mets, who likes the Yankees.
I bet. Let's shift gears and have you talk about your career as a New York City detective. Did you start out as a policeman and then go to a detective? I mean, explain how that works and give us a sense of what your career was like.
Yeah, growing up in my family, my grandfather was a police officer in NYPD, and he did 30 years retired. My dad, coming after World War II, my father was in the Marine Corps, he was in the Air Wing, and he fought in the Pacific Theater. and he was stationed mostly in Tarawa, the Shins over there, and quite exciting career my dad had. He came back and he wanted a job with a union, straw union, and would have benefits, lifelong benefits, and medical benefits. And he thought about the police department. And he became a cop in 1946, retired in 66. And when I was growing up, he told me and my siblings, whenever you get a job with benefits, that, with a strong union. And I got out of high school, I couldn't sing or dance, so I thought I'll continue the family tradition. I'll become a cop.
Mm-hmm.
And I did. I started as a patrolman, working in the South Bronx. Now, the South Bronx sounds very intimidating and to most people from outside of New York, but it's not. I grew up in the Bronx. I played baseball with people from every ethnic, every different kind of culture. I played football. So even though the South Bronx is intimidating to other people, it was not to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked there. I worked hard. And most promotions you get within the police department are by passing civil service tests, become a sergeant, lieutenant, and then rise up. The only promotion you can get by your own merits is detective, by making very good arrests, working hard, and catching the eye of your superiors who would then recommend you for the detective shield. And that was my goal. I'm not a good test taker, but I could run the streets very well. I was able to do police work very well, and one of my crowning glories was becoming a detective. And I'll go a little further. My kid brother, he's 10 years younger than me. He followed the same family tradition. He's a very bright guy. He graduated from Fordham University, which is a very prestigious school in New York. And he, today, with like 36 years on the police department, he is the top cop. He is the chief of department with the entire NYPD.
Wow.
I just wish my parents were alive to see that, but that's who he is. He's a top cop.
And
how the Monahan career is gone. The Monahan family was in the NYPD for, many. We got over 100 years of service.
That's amazing. Well, I'm thinking with a name like Monahan, you only had probably a couple of choices, right? And being a police officer was one of them.
And funny, most of the kids I grew up with were just a little bit before people going to college a lot. We come out of high school, and we took the union jobs, police department, fire department, sanitation, or the telephone company or the electrical company. Con Edison in New York is the gas company. That's what most we did. These are union jobs, and these are careers that you're going to get a pension. This is what we did in my day, and in my case, it worked out well. In fact, everybody I know, my friends, it worked out well. And even though many of my friends moved out of the Bronx, we're still in the tri-state area, and we get together often. Like I said, today is an example. There'll be a bunch of us getting together today. And this is something you can't put a price tag on. It's funny. I travel around the world. I worked in Bosnia for a year after the war there, and I met many people. And many people I meet around the globe don't have more than 5 close friends.
Right.
And I can actually brag and say I've got 100.
Wow.
And it's not exaggeration, because I'm still in the same area I grew up with, and many of my friends the same thing. They live in their fathers passed on, they take over the father's house. Then they pass on and give it to their sons. I'm in a community, it's called Throg's Neck section of the Bronx, which I know 100 people. It's incredible. I still meet friends I went to grammar school with. And this is an incredible treasure to me.
Well, that's great to hear. Before we segue into the book, I see that one of your main passions is scuba diving, and that you've explored shipwrecks from all over the world. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it's kind of funny. When I was a detective, we work in homicides. It got kind of busy, and we were having dinner one time in a diner. I was talking to my buddy and I said, Gus, we need a diversion. We can't just be doing police work all the time. We need something. We need a hobby of some sort. And we decided to try scuba diving. He went to a class first, and we had to rearrange his schedule so he could do that. And then when he graduated with his certification, I went, and it became a passion. Scuba diving is really, really wild. And like anything else, you start with the shallow water, little reefs. Everything is pretty. You want bigger, better, deeper, and more exciting. And I've actually traveled the world. I've been to Australia. I've been to Papua New Guinea. I've been to the Galapagos Islands. I've been to this place called Saba. It's a small island in the Caribbean. And my last diving trip was about 4 years ago. I actually went to off of Guam. There's a place called oh gosh, the name just escaped me. Oh gosh, I Truck Lagoon. There's like we sank the Japanese ships there during World War II. It was like their version of Pearl Harbor. And I love shipwrecks, and the whole lagoon is full of shipwrecks. So I enjoy that. There's something different. It gets the heart, the blood pumping, and the adrenaline running.
Now, when you go down there, do you weave yourself into the ships themselves, or do you stay on the outside? I'm not sure how it works.
It depends on the shipwreck. If the shipwreck is one that can be penetrated, I do a lot of research in shipwreck. I like to know how they were sunk, what kind of water lay in, what dangers there are. What we do is we carry a reel, and we'll tie the reel outside the shipwreck to a fixed object, and we'll usually with just two divers together, you buddy up. The lead diver will roll the reel in, lead in with flashlights, and the second diver will follow behind by holding the reel. And you investigate different compartments, and you see different things. And some shipwrecks you see all kinds of machineries inside. If it's a warship, you may see like airplane parts, tanks, whatnot. And you gotta be very careful watching your gauges, your time, and whatnot. I mean, when you want to get back out, you reel yourself back out again. It's sort of like reeling in a fish. You reel back out so you don't get lost, because when you're inside these compartments of old shipwrecks, there's a lot of soot and debris inside, and your bubbles and you're kicking your fins will kick it up, and actually sometimes you get into a debris storm you can't see, even with your flashlight. So you have to reel yourself out and be very careful. But it's exciting. The adrenaline rush is unbelievable. Are
there any notable shipwrecks in the New York City area, off of Long Island, Hart Island?
Oh, absolutely. And right off of about 10 miles off of Fire Island, which is not too far from the Bronx area and where Hart Island is, a shipwreck called the USS San Diego. In World War I, it was the flagship of the U.S. Navy. And it's down in about 110 feet, 120 feet of water upside down, and you can still dive in there, penetrate it, and there's still live ammunition inside that shipwreck. And there's dives through it all the time. The Andrea Doria is not too far from here. It's a boat ride out. It takes a little while to get to Andrea Doria. That's a pretty famous shipwreck. There's a lot of shipwrecks. In fact, the East Coast is called the graveyard of the Atlantic, because during World War II, which many people didn't realize at the time, we didn't have blackouts along the coast that often. And submarines would sit out in the water and just wait for tankers to go by, and they were lit up by the lighting on the shore of the East Coast. And they just like shooting ducks in a barrel. And all those shipwrecks are down in about 130 feet of water or less, and they're very easily to dive on. And scuba divers who know this dive all the shipwrecks I dive the shipwrecks between New Jersey and Florida, and then down to the Caribbean.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
To do. Oh, it is. It really is. But you have to be careful. That's part of it. You have to use your brain. You've got to be in halfway decent shape. And again, research is half the ball game.
Right. Let's maybe the shipwrecks is a good place to use as a segue to your book about Hart Island. How did you come up with the inspiration to write the book, and tell us some more about the book?
Well, it's most people, if you're away from electronic devices, the house, televisions, computers, whatnot, I like to go for a walk along the beach. Your mind opens up. It just opens up incredibly when you're by yourself and you're walking. And the same thing happens while kayaking. While kayaking around City Island, I have a vivid imagination, and my imagination kicked in. I was reading into a story about Captain Kidd, and I was thinking one of these islands could be one of his, he could hold his gold. And just going around Hart Island, I said, wait a minute, suppose he hits some here. Suppose some of these prisoners will dig in these graves, stumble upon it. It could just actually happen. It's feasible. It's not completely, wacky. And an idea came to my mind, and I sit on ideas sometimes for years. Now, I've written 5 books, some scuba diving books, and this one on Hart Island. And the idea kept going in my head, and then the winter time, it's kind of cold in New York. There's not a whole lot to do, so me and the computer became good friends, and I write. That's how the story came.
You had mentioned, although we're not going to tell anybody, you've actually been on Hart Island. What did you see when you were there?
Well, there's a lot of old buildings, decrepit buildings, because Hart Island's gone through many changes over the last couple hundred years. And it's one of the scary parts is part of the islands where they bury babies, stillborn babies or just young children that just aren't claimed by anybody. And what they did many years ago is they put white rocks to make a cross in the northern end of the island. And many of the prisoners refuse to go there. A lot of people will not go back under the island because it's a sacred area where children are buried. But it's fascinating. Some of the old buildings that still stand that go back for many years. And the island's only about, let's see, what is it, about a mile and a half long and only 1/3 of a mile wide. So it's not gigantic, but it's been used for so many different things over the years. Civil War training camp, and the Civil War prisoners were kept there. When there's a TB outbreak, they put people out there. At one time, they had a women's psychiatric center. It was used as a drug haven called Phoenix House where drug addicts would recover. It's gone through so many phases. Many of these buildings still stand in disrepair. Hurricane Sandy had a devastating effect on Hart Island back in, I guess it was 2007 or 8. And even washed up along the shore, it did so much damage that some of the bones from the early graves, some of the caskets actually were washed into the water. Which again brings more of the aura of the whole island.
Right.
Which helps the book.
Without giving us or telling us what happened at the end, the main premise is that there's this race between the guards and the prisoners for the gold. Can you tell us a little bit about that without giving away what happened at the end?
Yeah, it's kind of, I use my imagination and part of my detective philosophies with different things. I knew that if the guards were with this prisoner when they found the gold, now it's a matter of, greed jumps in immediately. Let's rehide this gold someplace. We'll come back and get it later. But how do you divide the gold up between prisoners and the guards? Everybody gets in their cell phones and calls their friends to come and get this before it gets stolen by somebody else. And now that's how it intertwines. You got 4 or 5 different stories going at one time. Who's going to get to the gold first? And then naturally, murder and mayhem ensue.
The good stuff.
It is. Well, this is what people want to read. The history part is fine, but you're laying that groundwork down for a nice, good detective story.
Right.
And my detective it's got to be an Irish cop, of course.
Of course.
So it's a Mick O'Shaughnessy, and it's called Miko for short. And I think it's kind of a cute name. So Detective Miko has to solve the crimes with all the homicides that occur.
Is Detective Miko going to show up on a subsequent piece of work?
He has. I actually, a lot of people don't realize, like in New York, Penn Station is a big train station in New York, but Lower Manhattan in New York is built up over Old New York. So you've got, in Penn Station, you've got 10 levels underground. And what we do is we build up over, so we've got train stations and we've got all kinds of things underground. And I wrote a follow-up book that brings the same detective involved with that, but it's called The Phantom of Penn Station, where a mass murderer hides down in Penn Station and commits murders. And he's hiding, and it's hard for now. Now Miko's got to try and find this guy in the bowels of New York City. And my imagination is just, because I worked there. I was a cop there for a while, so I know about these things. So I'm writing about an area underground that I know about, but I just fictionalize it.
Right. For those who might be interested in picking up a copy or two, where would they go? You have your own website, I believe, right?
I refer the websites. I don't do very well with that. I'm not that technical, so I usually use Amazon. And on Amazon, if you look for Mike Monahan on Amazon, any of my books, whether it be we'll talk mostly about the treasure of Hart Island, it'll lead you to my other books. And there's actually an author page which gives you a background of myself. I have some photographs there of some activities I enjoy, motorcycling, scuba diving, and my police picture. So it's kind of interesting. So I use Amazon as my webpage, basically. So anything you want to find about me is Mike Monahan on Amazon.
Okay. Well, on the cover, I believe, of your book, The Treasure of Hart Island, is your gold detective shield?
It's a generic copy. See, what says NYPD on a picture would normally have the numbers. My badge number would be on there. So that's that's the copy. That's what it looks like. Anybody ever watched NYPD Blue back years ago? That's all about New York City detectives.
And why is the gold detective shield so important to you?
Because it's earned. It's not given to you by promotion, by taking a test. You have to earn it. So at the time I became a detective, there's only 4,000 detectives, a group of, I guess, maybe 25,000 police officers. So we were the minority, and we consider ourselves the best detectives in the world.
I think that's been proven, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
No, really, I think it has been. I think it has been. Well, Mike, I want to tell you, this has been a real treat hearing about you, hearing about the Bronx, certainly hearing about your book and Hart Island. You're, of all the people we've spoken to, you're the one probably the most closest to Hart Island because you've actually been on it. And I just want to thank you very much for being a guest on Talking Hart Island. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Oh, thank you so very much for having me as a guest. Thanks so much, Michael.
Hi, this is Norma Jean. I wanted to take a moment to remind you, in order to receive updates or news about upcoming episodes of Talking Hart Island, simply go to the subscribe page on our website located at www.michaeltkeene.com and enter your email address. If you have any questions about the podcast itself or simply wish to contact any team members for book inquiries, voiceovers, website or graphics design, use our contact page, also found at www.michaeltkeene.com. And if you're enjoying the show and would like to give us a review, please do so at iTunes. We would greatly appreciate it. So until next week, this is Norma Jean, and we're Talking Hart Island.